All right. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the ADA. I'm going to start with a little story. And this was about I started a new job at an insurance company, a medical insurance company. And I was going to be a case manager on their crisis team when someone became very ill or in crisis or homeless and needed the ER constantly. So this was interesting task for me to take on and to help the insurance help their members. However, they were not using physical phones. They were using the computer to make phone calls. And so what happened to me was I could not hear, there was not enough volume for me to hear the person on the other end. There was no text. There was no captioning. So then I had to figure out what to do. And so I went to my boss and I said, hey, I'm not hearing enough on the phone system to be able to handle these calls. What should we do? I could ask for apparatus that would plug into the computer, and then that would transmit to my cochlear implants. But it's a little expensive. I just said, who cares? As long as you can hear the phone calls and make the phone calls, that's all we want. So she said, write up the letter and give it to me. I'll get it to the board. So that's what we did, and without blinking, they got me the mini mic, which I was able to plug into my laptop and get a good signal to my cochlear implants. So that was not cheap at all, and they did not hesitate to do that. And it was worth a lot to me. That the insurance company got behind me and said, no, we'll do that. So that was called an accommodation. It was called following the ADA. And that's what I want to talk about today, is the ADA. Now, the ADA is a law. So, it's a big law. Pages and pages of law here in the United States. It was signed into law in 1990 by President Bush, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. I think President Reagan also signed some, so it was like the beginning in 1976, somewhere around there. I'm not sure of my dates and the person, but anyway, it's a law. It's a very large law, and it doesn't cover only wheelchair users. It covers the blind, the deaf, the mute, those with cardiac problems, those with one leg, those with crutches, those with walkers. It covers anyone with a disability or what qualifies as a disability. So I wanted to talk about this today because, not in a technical sense, but how to use it. And I just want to say this, and to any lawyers who might be listening, a law in itself are just words on a piece of paper. Listen to me well. A law are only words on a piece of paper. And it is worthless. It's not worth a thing unless someone steps forward to pronounce it and say, hey, we're having trouble in this area, and I need a judge to look at this to see if there is an injustice and how we can correct it. So I say this to lawyers, I say this to students, I say this to social workers, I say this to nurses. The ADA is useless It's only words on a piece of paper unless someone says something, pronounces something for it to be used, for it to take some action. And that's for any law. So this is really important for us to consider. A law are only words on a piece of paper unless someone brings it forward and pronounces it. It doesn't have to necessarily be an attorney. It can be one of us. It can be your grandmother. It can be anybody, to bring it forth and say, hey, I think there's been a violation in this area. So there's been an injustice, there's been a lack of, there's been an insult, there's been an injury, there's been an accident, there's been, it can be any one of those. So kind of keep that in mind. The next thing is, does the ADA cover everything, absolutely everything and everyone? No, it does not. There are exceptions to the ADA. And I think we're aware here in the United States that some buildings, some situations are excluded from the ADA because they were built before 1990. So there are some exceptions to the rule that some buildings don't have to comply. Some parts of the city don't have to comply because they were built before 1990 and they're historic. They're a historic marking of XYZ. So, and they do not have to be altered, can't be altered because of this other law. So it's kind of like a seesaw. You have to look at, okay, who complies, who needs to comply, who falls into that particular law. And my job recognized that I needed assistance under, I'm deaf, I use cochlear implants, and they don't use phones. They use a computer system to make phone calls. And it wasn't a very good quality when I started. So it was like, oh my God. So, and everybody was complaining about it. It wasn't just me, but a lot of people are having difficulties hearing their phone calls through this computer system. So, of course, on my end, I was struggling 3 times more than anybody else. So, and they didn't hesitate. They said, okay, this falls under the ADA. She wrote us a letter, and she talked to her boss. She went through all the procedures needed very nicely, and so we will respond in kind, because there is a law and we need to follow it. We want to follow it. We want to help Lisa. So that's kind of how it should proceed when we are asking for something that's really, really needed. For instance, your sidewalks near where you live, a store that you want to use, an apartment building you want to live in. So there are a lot of circumstances in which the ADA does fit in. And the owner and the city needs to comply, the mayor, whoever is involved needs to comply with the ADA. The ADA is a federal law, and it also is a state law. So the state will have their own particular points in the ADA, but they can't violate or take anything out that the federal law has. So the federal law covers it all, and then the state has all of the federal laws plus its own little characteristics for its state. So if that makes sense. So, when you want to or need to, you live on XYZ street and it's awful and it's difficult for your wheelchair to get through because there's this cut or there's this dip in the sidewalk and you can't get through, or there's this root of this tree that's blocking you, the city needs to hear about it so they can come and fix it. You might have to pay something. I don't know. Sometimes you might have to pay, you might not have to pay, and they may not have to pay anything because it falls under the ADA, and the city should have fixed this a long time ago. And you don't want any injuries either, so the city has to come and fix it to comply with the ADA to make sure their sidewalks are clear for wheelchair users and people who are blind and everything else. So, but a letter has to be written. Somebody has to say something for it to get fixed. We can't just stand there and talk about it and say, oh, well, my sidewalk, blah, 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 and this and that, the city is in violation. They're not in violation until somebody tells them. They're happy-go-lucky that they don't have to spend the money to fix it until somebody writes that letter. And they put out the statutes, which they are in violation. There's a store that I use quite a bit in a commercial center not far from here. And as any grocery store, they put out plants outside, in the spring and the summer. And their stands outside are blocking the sidewalk, so it's hard for me to get through. The bus stop is like 5 steps from there. And so it's very hard for me to maneuver to get to the bus stop. So I haven't said anything yet, but I am tempted for this spring to write a letter, find the manager and say, hey, would you mind reducing the amount of stands you put on the sidewalk because I can't get through to get to the bus stop. It's getting a little ridiculous. I realize that you want to increase your sales, but do something different, please. So it's that kind of thing that, and they know they would be in violation if they blocked the sidewalk. And I'm sure that the store would be happy to help me, because they don't want to be in violation. They don't want to get their hands slapped. So you see what I'm saying? That the ADA is at our service, but the ADA can't act by itself. It takes us. It takes a lawyer to bring it forward and say, excuse me, this is not working for us. It's not working for the blind. It's not working for the deaf. It's not working for the people in wheelchairs, and we need it fixed. And a lawyer will look at it, will look at this particular statute, will look at the problem and say, you're right. The city needs to fix this. And so, here's my stamp of approval. I will send a letter to the state saying, as a judge, this case has been brought to me, and you must fix XYZ. At an apartment, nothing's going to happen or change unless you say something. Unless you write that letter to the management and say, excuse me, but the elevator is broken down. I can't get to my apartment. You might need to act a little bit quicker than that, but, I think that every building, should have plenty of apartments on first floor for people with disabilities. Because you don't, as a person with disabilities, you don't want to be on second floor, third floor, fifth floor, sixth floor, seventh floor, and then there to be an emergency, and then you're stuck. You're stuck at home or you're stuck downstairs. So the ADA, again, is at our service. It doesn't cover everything. When there are historic buildings, historic cities, historic neighborhoods, then the ADA is a little limited. the ADA does not apply in certain circumstances such as airports and airlines. It's the ACAA that helps us in airports and airlines. So it's a particular quirk of the ADA. The ACAA was inspired by the ADA, without a doubt. But we have to remember, okay, I'm stepping into a different world now. Now what covers me is the ACAA. So, and we've talked about that before. And you can look it up in my videos. I'll connect that here so you can kind of look at the difference. But the ADA, you know, we need to treasure it. We need to use it, learn how to use it. There was one gal who came on here and listened to me. I did a technical review of the ADA, and I read some paragraphs, and specifically on renting. And so she took time, wrote a letter, put the statutes in there that applied to her circumstances, because she had been living in this building for a long time. She was now in a wheelchair, and her apartment was no longer accessible for her. So she asked for accommodations. She was afraid to do it at first, but she said, well, Lisa said. So she wrote a letter, added the statutes, very diligent in her organization of the letter. She sent it in to her management. Her management, within a week, got back to her and said, absolutely, we are going to do that. We're renovating the building anyway, and we need to help you. We need to do this. So I don't know what the end of the story was, but she came back to me. She came back to the channel and said she was floored. The management responded right away and said, yes, we are going to make those accommodations for you, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So I'm assuming that it was a happy ending, because usually those things take a long time, and battles and all that stuff. And no, it was not a doubt they were going to help her. They were going to make those adjustments, and not a problem. So she was correct in all that she asked for. So there you go. I was, you know, it's just one of those miracles that happens on this channel. And so I say to everyone, you know, if something is causing you a problem in your building, at work, at a street that you use a lot, say something. You know, ask, who do I need to go to work on this street problem that I have, or at work, or, you know, there's special advocacy for work issues, because there are jobs that don't have to comply when they have so many employees. It's a size of employees, size of the company, and if it's a historic building, so a lot goes into it. I didn't have any issues in my job because the building was new, the company was pretty new, and they fell under the state service to the people, so it was ADA to the hilt. No issues, no questions. So they were happy to comply and help me out. And that was a very expensive piece of equipment, I can tell you. So you have to look at the circumstances and make sure that the ADA applies in what you're asking for. But you gotta say something, you gotta do a little bit of your research, or find someone who can help you do the research to see if the ADA applies to the situation. If it does, then you gotta find who you need to write that letter to. And it doesn't have to be you, it can be another person, it can be an advocate, it can be, you know, doesn't have to be you. And then, you know, but you have to keep on it, respond to the letters, respond to, you know, and if they don't want to comply, then it just goes to court. But hopefully, on goodwill, they say, no, you're correct. This does fall under the ADA. We're happy to comply. We want to get this done by, in 4 weeks or something. So, and you want to keep them on a timeline. You want to keep them, because sometimes they say, oh yeah, sure, we'll get it done. And then nothing happens. And so you write another letter and then say, oh yeah, oh, I'm sorry. We forgot about that. We'll get to it. No, you need to keep them to a timeline. So I would like to see this happen in 4 weeks, please, or in 2 weeks, or, depending on the circumstances. But you got to keep on top of it. So first of all, you need to look and see, make sure it does fall into the ADA, and the ADA applies to the problem. And then you got to find who you need to write to, because it needs to go on paper. You need to have a paper trail for all of this. So it has to be formal. And then keep it with a timeline. Even in your first letter, you already know it applies to the ADA. You already know the statute that applies to this problem. So then you say, it applies to XYZ, and I would like to see this problem resolved by, you put a date there. And when you get a response, then they'll tell you, we have some funding for this, we will get it done even before that date, hopefully. Or they act like, who are you? We don't understand. Sometimes they go about it that way. It's like, you said what? They act like they're high or something. So you don't want that either. So you truly need to wake them up. And if they're playing fishy, then too hard to catch, then you mention, well, I'll see you in court. And it's sad to go that way. It's sad that you would have to sit before a judge and resolve it. I think anyone, with or without the ADA, should say, oh man, we're so sorry. We'll get it done next week. Even if the ADA doesn't, even if you said to the mayor, you bumped into the mayor at the grocery store and you said, oh, mayor, blah, 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 I'm having trouble with this and this street. Is there any way I'll write you down? No, I'll take a look at this. I'll put it on my desk first thing in the morning. I'll tackle it, give it to my secretary, and have the construction people go over there and fix it. So sometimes it can happen that way. It can happen just verbally. But most of the time you have to write a formal letter. So I just want to let you know that formality sometimes for a law is the best. And again, for any law, ADA or domestic violence or human trafficking or rental property rules, they're only words on a piece of paper. They have no value whatsoever until somebody uses it the correct way. So I want to encourage everyone to know that the ADA is for you to look at, to review, to see what applies to you right now at your job or at your rental place or on the streets, at the grocery store, whatever it might be that's causing an obstacle for you. The ADA is there to support you. So you'd have to go into the law. I know it's a little, legalese is hard to understand sometimes, but you can go to a lawyer, you can go to ADA lawyer, hopefully, or to a paralegal to kind of help you sort out what law you need to pull and say, oh, it applies to this one. It's there to help you. It really is. And the more we use it, the better. There are people of very goodwill out there and don't need to be reminded. You can verbally say it once and boom, it gets fixed. but sometimes you have to go through the formalities, and that's okay too. In most laws, strict laws, you know, you have to write the letter and do the formality, and hopefully you don't have to go to court. That's the last place you want to go to, because it costs time, money sometimes. So think of it that way. The ADA is an umbrella there to assist you when you need it. Take your time to kind of look at it, pull out some statutes you think that would apply to you as a person with disabilities and wheelchairs. The ADA is huge. It's complicated, complex sometimes, but it is there to help. All right. Any questions about this or any experiences you want to share? If the person who had that experience with the ADA in her apartment, feel free to give us an update on how you're doing. All right. Give it a like and subscribe if you like. And I will definitely see you all in the next video.